Hey guys, it's Sam for Digital Meat, and in this Realflow for Cinema 4D tutorial we're going to be looking at how we can blend fluids together using Vertex Maps. So let's just jump straight in. I've got a simple scene set up here, and in this scene folder at the top is contained my lighting and the background and the floor. That's pretty unimportant. I've done other tutorials about how I set these scenes up, so you can go look at them. And in fact, while I'm on the subject, I'm not going to spend too much time setting up the Realflow scene in terms of the colliders and the emitters and that kind of thing, because it's not really about that, this tutorial. So if you're unfamiliar, you can go to my YouTube channel and check out the Realflow for C4D playlist, or you can go to my website digitalmeat.uk and go to the tutorials page, and you can filter the tutorials by the Realflow category, and they'll all be listed there. So let's just get straight into this. So what we're trying to attempt to do here is blend two different fluids. In this case it will be the same fluid but two different emitters, to come up with an effect like this kind of blending mixing effect. As you can see, we've got blue and yellow here. They're mixing together to create this green color, and yeah, I'll basically be showing you how you can do this using Vertex Maps, and kind of a workaround that I came up with to get this effect, because the way color blending works within Cinema 4D is a little bit difficult, but we'll get into that after we set the scene up. So let's get cracking. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to need to do is actually get my Realflow sort of scene tree in, and we can do that by creating an emitter. So I'm going to create a circle emitter, and as you can see, we've got the scene here. I'll move it down to the bottom because we're going to be dealing with this mainly. So we've got our emitter under emitters, and I'm just going to tweak this slightly, because let me just come out of this camera. As you can see, we've got the Realflow symbol on the floor there. That might be slightly distracting, so let's get rid of the display icon. You can do that in the scene there, so that gets rid of that. And I'm going to actually create two emitters here. So I'm going to create emitter, I'm going to call this emitter 0 and emitter 1. So we need to size these. So I'm going to go into object, and the width for this, I'm going to say it's 43 centimeters for both of these. Now I've set this scene up before, so that's why I'm able to do this quickly. Like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on doing the setup of the emitters and the colliders, so I'm just going to zoom through this. Okay, so emitter 0, its position. So coordinates, I'm going to leave that at 0. This can be 245.266, so that raises it up to about here. And for this, I'm going to go minus 70.693. Now you might be thinking this is very specific, and it's because I've set this scene up before, so I know what values I used. And we're going to rotate this as well, so it's pointing towards the glass. There we go. So now when we play this, it should, yep. And as you can see, they're not falling, so we'll remedy that in a minute after we set up our second emitter, and you can't really see the particles that well, so we'll remedy that as well. So let's go to emitter 1 and put our values in for this. So 245.266, so it goes up to the same height. 69, that'll do, something like that. Yep. Okay, rotation, we want 70 degrees. Actually, we want minus 70 degrees because it's on the other side, and minus 720. Okay, cool. So now that's set up, these things are pointing towards each other. Lovely. So we want to make our particles a little bit easier to see, and that can be done in the fluid, and we can go to the display tag, and we can just put the particle size up to 3. That should make things a lot easier. Yep, so we can see those a lot better now. Okay, so we're going to need some gravity in our scene as well, so let's go to Realflow, Demons, and then we'll add a gravity demon. There it is. So now these should fall down. Yep, great. So they're just going through the floor at the moment because the glass hasn't got a collider tag on it. So let's sort that out. So where's our glass? There it is. So grab our glass, right click, Realflow tags, collider. So what do we need to set up in this little bad boy? So in the properties, all the collision stuff is pretty much as I want it, although I'd like to add a bit of friction. So let's just crank this up one, and I'm going to leave everything else as it is. So let's add the other tag, which is the volume tag. And now we can actually start tweaking the settings in this as well. For the most part, I'm quite happy with these settings, apart from the cell size, because if we visualize our collider, so go to display, check on geometry, go to the beginning of the scene, and you can see that it's a little bit, it's not great. But if we go to the volume tag, turn off our cell size, you can see it's at 7 at the moment. I'm going to change this to 2, so we've got a bit of a tighter. There we go. That looks a lot better. Great. So we can go back to our collider tag and turn off our show collision geometry. So we're back to where we are, and now you can see the particles are collecting in the bottom of the glass now. Great. So moving on to the fluid settings, let's go to the fluid and go to the fluid tab. And here we've got the settings for the fluid. Now I want to crank up the resolution. So let's call that 30. So now we should have more particles. There we go. Much better. We can actually see what's going on. That's good. As far as all the other settings go, I'm more than happy with those at their standard settings. So that's fine. Okay, so scene, solver. We're going to have to affect some of these, and there's a good reason for this. If I come out of this view and go into a side view here, we can see the bottom of the glass. Let me just zoom out a little bit. What's that? Oh, that's my lights. So, in fact, let me just go back to this view. And as you can see the lights in the scene. And sometimes these might get in the way. So what I tend to do is go to filter and turn off the lights so they're not visible in the scene. They're still there, and they still have an effect. They're just hidden. So yeah, let's go back to this view and get in on our glass and see what happens when we press play, because in this view, you know, our camera view, everything looks fine actually. These are pissing particles into our cup and it's filling up. And for the most part, it looks like correct. But if we go into our side view, you might find that you have particles going through the bottom of our container. And that's a problem. It will slow down the scene because these particles will be falling essentially forever, and they'll need to be calculated as they do that. So that's no good. As you can see, they're all there falling forever. And we could put a kill box around this, or we could actually affect our collider shape to make it more efficient. Well, not the collider, the solver actually. So if I go into the solver settings and have a look at this stuff, for the most part, this needs to be left alone, this stuff here, but these auto parameters, we can change these. So I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to crank these min substeps up to 6 and the max up to 6. And that, I'm hoping, should fix our problem. So let's go back into this view and rewind. And as you can see now, we have no fluids escaping through the bottom. And actually the way this fluid is reacting is a lot more natural, which is good. Great. Okay, so let's go back to our camera view. So the only other thing that we need to do is add a mesh. So let's go to Realflow, Mesher, and that adds a mesher here. And I've got a few settings for the mesh in terms of its look and structure. And to be honest, again, this tutorial is not really about the look of the mesh, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. And in fact, I'm going to leave most of these settings as they are. I'm just going to bring the radius down because we've got quite a lot of particles in the scene. We don't need to, we can have as low as 3, and that should be fine. It shouldn't look too blobby or anything because there's not enough space between our particles to cause that, because we have a lot of particles in the scene. So that's pretty good. Okay, so now all that's set up. If I hit play, there we go. Our mesh is being generated along with our particles, and all is well. Okay, so now we can actually move on to the blending aspect of this tutorial. So what I'm going to do is actually, let's get our lines back. I'm going to hide this glass just so we can see what's going on with our fluid. So we're going to hide it from the viewport and hide it from the render. Everything will work just as before, but we just won't have that the mesh of the glass getting in the way. And in fact, while I'm here, I'm going to do this so we can actually see everything a little bit better. Okay, so let's get onto the blending aspect of this then. Right, how that's done is through Vertex Maps, and you'll notice on the mesher, if we look here, we have 3 Vertex Maps already, and we've got velocity Z, velocity Y, and velocity X, and we can actually use these Vertex Maps we can do loads of stuff with it. But the problem with these, they aren't really giving us any information about each of these emitters. They're only giving us information about the speed, well, the velocity of the fluid. So that gives us the velocity in the Z direction, this direction, and then obviously Y and X. So that's not going to help us. So what do? Well, if we go into the mesher and go into this channels tab here, we have a few different options here. So you can create vertex maps based on speed, vorticity, age, and then we have this weights, and this is what we want to look at. So let's check the weights checkbox on, and in the drop down we've got a choice between fluids and emitters. Now this is because we can generate vertex weights based on whether it's looking at the separate emitters in the scene, or we can have 2 separate fluids. In this case we've got a couple of different emitters, so that's what we're going to do. And so let's choose emitters. Now you'll notice that not much has happened. We've still got the same amount of vertex maps up here, and that's because we actually need to cache the scene. So if we go to scene, go to cache, let's just make sure there's nothing in there. No, there isn't. Okay, good. So I'm just going to cache this, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, it's finished caching. It just took over a minute, 1.5 gig there. We can OK that. And as you'll notice up here on the mesher, we now have some extra vertex maps. So we've got the X, Y, Z velocity still, but we've also got this weight 0 and weight 1. And if we scrub forward, and in fact, I think I'm going to hide the particles, just so they're not in the way in the scene. And if we select any one of these, it will show us where the weights are. So that's fluid 0, I think, yeah, and this is fluid 1. And as you can see, they're all kind of sort of mixed together. So we can actually use this information to create a material. So first of all, I'm going to go through the way that is actually suggested in the Realflow documentation, just to give you a taste of what they sort of recommend. So I'm going to create 2 fluids. So let's create one here, and let's call this fluid 0, because that relates to weight 0, and this is exactly the reason that I called this emitter 0 and emitter 1. Okay, so let's keep it nice and simple. Fluid 0. I'm going to go into the reflectance and get rid of this horrible specular. Turn on Beckman, make it a dielectric, and then we're going to choose a colour for it. So in this case, let's just crank these up and then choose 200 for the blue. So this is our blue fluid. Okay, and then I'm going to make a copy of this, and I'm going to call this fluid 1. And in the colour, I'm going to make this yellow, so 60 for that, and yeah, those 2 at the top. So we've got our 2 fluids now. So what's suggested in the Realflow documentation is that you stack these up. So fluid 0 goes on the mesher first, because that's our base material, and then fluid 1 goes on top of that. And if I were to render this, obviously it's only going to render the fluid that is on top. So there we go. It's not great, is it? But we can use these vertex maps, and we actually only need to use one, because fluid 0 is the base layer, if you like. So there's no point using the weight 0 in that because it's at the bottom anyway. You don't need to see through that. So in this case, we can forget about that. But in Fluid 1, what Realflow suggests you do is turn on the alpha channel, okay, and then put our vertex map in here. So we need weight 1 in our Fluid 1. But you can't just drag this in here. What you have to do is click this, go down to Effects, and then right at the bottom here, you've got Vertex Map. And that lets you feed this into this Vertex Map Shader. So if we go inside that, there's a slot for Vertex Map. We can put this in, and Bob's your uncle. So let's give this a little render now and see what happens. Well, now you can see that we've got a sort of mixture of blue and yellow. But it doesn't look very pretty, does it? And it doesn't really look like it's mixing too well either. Well, there's another setting in the mesher. If we go back to the mesher and go back to the channel tab, we've got this smoothing length scale, and currently it's set to 1. So I'm going to set this to, say, 5. I think its maximum is 10 actually. And if next limit is listening, it might be good to not have 10 as the cap and let us go a little bit further. Now, I don't know if that's a limitation of Cinema 4D or just a limit Realflow put in, but it could be good to have that as a bigger value, and I'll show you why a little bit later. So actually, let's just put it up to 10, and now this will have no effect on our vertex maps when you change this. You have to cache the scene again, so let's put it all the way up to 10. I'm going to go back to scene, I'm going to remove the cache, and I'm going to calculate the cache again. So I'll see you in a second. Okay, so the cache is done, and as you can see, it's taken significantly longer this time, 3.5 minutes. So I should imagine that's because for every frame of each of these vertex animated vertex maps, it had to apply 10 smooth operations to each frame, if you know what I mean. So that's probably why it's taken longer. Anyway, let's just hit OK and have a look at these vertex maps. Now you can see the edges have been smoothed out quite a lot for each of these, so this may give us a better result. So let's hit render and see what we got. Okay, well, they're definitely blending better, but we do have a little bit of an issue. You'd expect that when you mix blue and yellow together, you'd get a green, and you kind of are here. But it's also looks like it's being multiplied with white for some reason. Now, I don't know the reason for this. I think that maybe when you've got a 0 value for vertex map, the underlying color, if the value is 0, might be white, or it might have to do with the way Cinema 4D mixes colors. And I think this may be the case, and I'll show you how I think I know this in a second when we move on to sort of my method. Cinema 4D uses a RGB model for its color, and RGB is an additive method. A good example of an additive method would be if you had a load of lights of different colors and shone them on the same spot. As you build up more and more colors, what the result or the outcome is actually white. So that's additive. Subtractive is more like paint. So the more and more colors you start to mix together with paint, they actually add up to black instead of obviously like white with the light example. But in Cinema 4D, the RGB method is additive. So the more and more you add, the more closer to white that it gets. That's my understanding of it anyway. So let's get rid of these materials because they're obviously not doing the job, and this doesn't look quite right, like I said earlier. So let's delete these. Let's get rid of these. And in fact, we can get rid of one of our fluids as well. So instead of stacking fluids on top of each other, we can actually do this in a single fluid. So let's get rid of the yellow. Let's open the blue and put this back to white. And let's just call it fluid. Now, what I'll do is I'll do a quick experiment, if you like, just to show you how these colors are blending together, just to get a bit of a better understanding. So in this texture slot in my color, I'm going to actually add a colorizer. And what that does is, if we go inside it, it basically lets us map something that's in our texture slot to this sort of gradient of colours here. So we don't need all three of these. Let's get rid of the middle one. And let's make these our colours. Okay, so we had 200 in the blue, didn't we? I think. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, 200 there, and then we can crank these right up to the top and say OK. This yellow is exactly where we want it. And this actually gives us a clue as to what was going on with our vertex map earlier. As this goes from blue to yellow, it doesn't transition through green on the way. It's more like this sort of messy grey colour. So let's inform this gradient what it should be applied to by adding in our texture slot the Vertex Map Shader. And then if we delve into the vertex map, we can add our weight 1 again. And then we can apply this material to our mesher and then give it a render. And it should look exactly like it did before when we were using the alpha method. And it pretty much does. We've got this grey in the middle, which is exactly what we're seeing in this gradient. So this is what I think was going on before with the alpha. It was trying to mix, and its journey to get from blue to yellow included this. Now we could intervene here. We could actually put another thing in here, open this up. In fact, let's open up the thing here just to make sure that this position is actually at 50%. So smack bang in the middle. And we could actually choose a green that we think this should be, something like that, and give it another render and see what the results are. Okay, so that's a little bit more like it. We're getting a mixture now. But the problem that we're having is where they actually meet in the middle of that gradient, great, it's green. But as it gets down to the bottom and they separate out, they separate back out to yellow and blue, which is not good. So let's just get a better view of what's going on here. There we go. So that's not what we want either. And if we actually scoot along to the end, this effect should be even more pronounced. Yeah. So we've got like this strip down the middle, which represents the middle of our gradient. And it's not particularly nice. You know, we've got the mix happening here, but they seem to be separating back out at the sides. And this is definitely not what we want. So, on to my solution then. So let's get rid of this and actually start putting together our fluid for this scene. Let's get back to our camera view as well. Great. Okay, so in our color channel, I'm actually going to create a layer shader. So before, when we had a couple of materials stacked up and we were using the alpha of one so we could see the material underneath, we can actually do that in one material using the layer shader system. So in here, I'm going to go to layer to create this. And then when we go in there, as you can see, it's empty. And then we can start stacking up our layers. So let's actually just get our separate colors in here. What we're going to need to do is add a color shader. In fact, we're going to need 2 of these. And these are going to represent our colors, obviously. So let's go to here. In fact, if we go back one, we can actually name these. So I'm going to name this color 0 and color 1. Oh, that's not what I wanted to click. There we go. Click on the title. Just to keep things organized, we're going to choose the colors that we had before. So in this case, I'm going to make this yellow. So that's 60, and then full on both of these. Great. And then color 1 is going to be our blue. So this is going to be 200. And these are going to be top like this. So now it's like we've stacked blue on top of yellow, and if I render, you'll see that you're just going to see blue because it's on the top. So we need to do what we did before, like defining a cutout, if you like, using the vertex map. So what we can do is add a vertex map shader, effects, vertex map, put this in between these two, go into the vertex map, and it's asking for a vertex map now, and we're just going to grab our weight 1 and bung that in there and come back to here. Now you'd think, oh yeah, that'll define it, but it won't. It'll just look exactly the same as it did before with the blue on top. So we've actually got to change the blending mode of this vertex map. So if you drop this down and say layer mask, it actually masks out using that vertex map. And that's now what we have. Great. Okay, so there we go. I'm actually going to bung all of this stuff in a folder. So let's create a folder. And there's a good reason for this. You'll see in a minute. So let's bung our colour in there. Let's drag all of our stuff in there. And it should be fine. And I'm going to name this folder Separate Colours. Okay, cool. You'll have to excuse the English spelling of colours there. Okay, so we've got all of this in here. So what do we need to do now? Well, we can define our mix colour as well. So I'm going to create another folder. Oh, and it's created it inside this one. So let's drag that out. So it's fully... We don't want that in there at all. There we go. There we go. Okay, good. And I'm going to call this folder Mix Colors. So Mix Colors. There we go. And I'm going to turn off the separate colors for now, just so we can concentrate on this one. What I will do though is open up the separate colors, and I'm going to right click on color 1 and say, what do I want to do? I actually want to copy this. Copy shader, there we go, and then click on mix colors and say paste shader. So there we go, we've got a nice copy of color 1 now. I'm going to do the same thing with color 0. Copy shader, click on this and paste shader. And I'm going to get them in the right order as well. Not that that actually matters for what I'm doing here. So this is our mixed colors, and you're thinking, great, you've got your colors in there, but all you have to do is change the folder. In fact, change the top color, which is blue, to multiply. So this basically multiplies this blue over this yellow and gives us the result of, excuse me, multiply, there we go, of this green. So that's our mix color. Give it a quick render. Lovely. There we go. So now we need to define, we want this mix color where the colors are actually mixing. So let's turn off the mixed colors for now, and so both of these are turned off. What I could do is create a shader, a Vertex Map Shader. Where's that gone? Oh, there we go, it's in there. Let's drag it out in between these two. Okay, so now we've got this Vertex Map Shader. Great. Go into it and maybe put our vertex map. I'll wait one. Go back, and then actually set this to layer mask. So this actually masks this from this, and I can tell you now it's not going to work, but I just want you to understand why it isn't going to work. So now we render. Oh dear, so it looks like this is green, whereas this bottom bit should be. So we could try invert in the map, but all that'll do is invert image. We'll get the opposite result. This will be green up here, so that's going to be no good either. So what we've got to try and do is find a way of basically finding the difference between our two vertex maps. So that's what we're going to do next. So I'm going to actually delete this vertex map and create a layer shader so we can play around within it. Okay, so this is our layer. I'm going to put this here, and let's go into our layer shader and then think about what it is that we're going to do. Well, we're going to need both of our vertex maps in here, so let's create a vertex map, and I think you can copy if you drag. Yep, there we go. So we're going to need vertex map 0, and we're going to need vertex map 1. Why do I keep clicking on that? I'm trying to change the name. There we go. So open up 0, and we're going to drag weight 0 into this. And then we're going to go into 1 and drag weight 1 into that. So now if we go back to the top level, we've got this layer, which I'm going to change to a layer mask, because we're trying to cut out, use these vertex maps to cut out, or at least show the difference between these two colors. So I thought, oh, that may work, so let's give it a go and see what we get. Not much difference. In fact, it's not what we want at all. In fact, again, this is terrible. So if we go into our layer shader, I think I multiplied this over this. So basically, it's like these vertex maps are being merged, if you like. Let's get back to our top layer. Yeah, layer mask. Now that's kind of working, but this layer mask needs to be inverted. And if we right click on this layer mask and invert image, we do get a result, but it's not one we want. And I found this quite confusing at first, but I did come up with a solution for it. So basically, inside my layer shader, what we actually need to do is create a colorizer. And let me just make sure this is no longer inverted. Yeah, so let's get this back to normal. Go into here, our layer. We're going to get rid of these, and we're actually going to create a colorizer. Now, you saw what I did with this before. It basically maps colors onto this gradient. So I'm going to get rid of these. And a good way to invert this stuff now, let's change this to white, because basically a vertex map is a black and white value. So that black and white value representing sort of 0 and 1. And that's exactly what the black and white here is going to be doing, 0 and 1. So we need to multiply this over our vertex maps. But we're going to need both of our vertex maps. So if I just loaded weight 1 into here, that's not going to help us. So we need to nest another layer shader in here. So let's put another layer shader in, go in, and then we can load our vertex map. So let's effect vertex map, and then we'll do another one. And just as we had before, just so I can keep track of what's going on, we'll name that Vertex Map 0, and I did it again, there we go, and Vertex Map 1. And in 0, we're going to grab 0, and in 1, we're going to grab 1. Brilliant. So it's exactly like we did before, and we're going to multiply this top one over the bottom one. So now we have this. So let's go back to our layer shader. Sorry, not our layer shader, our colorizer, and just give it a render and see what happens. Okay, great. Brilliant. I'm actually going to reverse these. So we've got white down this end and black up this end. And let's see what we get. So it's basically like we've inverted it. Great, so we're getting the result that we had before, but you'll notice that these are just yellow and blue, and this stuff is kind of washed out at the bottom. Now, the great thing about having our colorizer in this layer here, if we go in again, we've got this colorizer, go in again, and then we've got another layer nested in with our vertex maps. But the nice thing about this is, now we can actually affect this. We can actually determine, we can control where our mix is and all of that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to grab this black here, and I'm going to drag this down to a knot position of 45. There we go. So let's give that a render and see what kind of effect that has. Okay, well it looks like this is getting more green, which is good. So we're actually sort of controlling that with this, and if I do this, it should get even more. There we go, even more green. But this blend is becoming less and less sort of desirable, if you know what I mean. These wouldn't be mixing at this point here. So I'm going to put this back to where I had it, which was at 45. And I'm going to see if we can do something else. And this is the bit that I came up with, which is a bit of a clunge and, you know, bit of a workaround. So let's go back one. And it's at this point in here, this is the layer with the colorizer. So let's just be clear. We've got a layer, we go in there, and we've got the colorizer. I'm going to actually add a gradient here. So let's go to shader, gradient, and we'll put this below. Let's turn off the colorizer for now, just so we can see what we're doing. Go into the gradient, and I'm going to change this to 2DU from 2DU even to 2DV, so it's a vertical gradient. And I'm also going to position this black knot here at, not position, what we're going to say, yeah, let's call it 50. Okay, so you can see that this is what we're getting now with this gradient knot. So let's just give it a render and see what kind of effect we're having. Okay, that's not too great, but we'll get to that in a minute. So that's everything that we need to do with the gradient. But the problem that we're having is because of the location of our texture tag. And when I say the location, you'll see what I mean in a second. Okay, so let's close this for now, grab our texture tag, and this doesn't really tell us anything about our location. But if we turn on this texture mode here, we now get this gizmo that we can move. Now, currently this is set to UVW mapping. I'm going to change this to spherical because there we go, and now we can see what's going on. Now we've got this texture tag selected, we can see this spherical mapping. If we move this, now we can control where that green actually is. So let's go into the coordinates for this, and we can change our size as well, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to, now I know my settings, 135 by 721. So basically what we're trying to do is make sure that this sphere here envelops our fluid in a way that's desirable to us, and that it's in the correct position. So I know the position that I need to be is 135.14. Great. And as you can see, it kind of bleeds off at the top. So let's just select this and go into our side view, and then you get a better idea of what's going on here. And it's applying that gradient up it. And you'll notice, if you remember in our gradient, we put our gradient knot at about 50%. So that will be the halfway mark here, and it will start bleeding off as it travels upwards. Okay, so that's why it looks like this. So now we've done that, we can come out of this, make sure we go back into object mode, give it a render and see what we look like. Okay, so now we're getting a bit more of a result. But if we go back through our animation to something like this and render, we're still getting this horrible sort of white weirdness in the middle. Now, you could probably forgive that. You could probably sort of go, do you know what, I could live with that. That's not too bad. And in fact, you might prefer it. It might look better. But in my case, this is why I had the colorizer. If we go back into this and go into our, let's just make sure we're in the right place. We go back right to the top. Okay, yeah, so let's go into our layer, and we've got this colorizer now. If we would turn this on, the whole lot's going to be, you know, it's going to override what we just did with the gradient underneath. But what we can do is multiply it over the top. So let's change the blending mode of our colorizer to multiply. And now when we render, there we go. We get best of both worlds. We get this sort of blend that we were controlling with our colorizer, multiplied over the top of the little sort of like workaround clunge that we just did with the gradient. Now, this isn't the ideal solution because, you know, in a scene like this, it's fine. We can use the gradient because we have a container that's been filled up and we can place our gradient where we want. But if it was a more eclectic scene where you had two fluids splashing into each other and that kind of thing, this may not be good for that. Like I said, this is a workaround more than anything. And if I come up with a better method, I'll be sure to inform you guys about it. But this is what I've come up with for this scene. And I think, actually, let's just make sure that we've got our blend correct there as well. Yeah, so, you know, it's slowly blending into this green. You can see the beginnings of green here. And obviously the gradient is taking care of the green down the bottom, so anything for past that 50% mark is getting fully green. So as before, we're not getting that problem now where as the fluids get further away from each other down the bottom, you know, before we had sort of blue on this side and yellow on this side, and obviously you don't get fluids that unmix, if you know what I mean. Once they're mixed, they're mixed. Unless they've got different densities or something like oil and water or something like that. But in our case, it's the same fluid, we're just using two separate emitters. So What I might do is actually experiment with trying different fluids. So if we go into our mesher, we can see that we're producing weights based on our emitters. But I haven't tried a scene with 2 fluids yet, so that'll be my next little R&D adventure. So yeah, that's basically how you achieve something like this. Yeah, so I hope you guys found that useful in some way. That's basically my workaround for mixing 2 colours to get this sort of like multiplied paint mixing look. And like I said, I'll keep making tests, and if I come up with a better solution, I'll be sure to let you guys know. If any of you guys have anything to add to this, be sure to let me know in the comments. If you've got an insight that I'm not aware of, I'd love to hear it. For my viewers on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell to be notified of new tutorials. You can check out content at digitalmeat.uk, where you can filter my tutorials by category and vote in the poll for upcoming tutorials. You can also follow me on social media, links in the description and the footer of my website. If you'd like to help support Digital Meat, this can be done via Patreon or the support page on the website. But if you want to help Digital Meat keep going and bag yourself some extra in-depth tutorial content, the Prime membership is available for purchase in the store. This will grant you access to the Prime membership area of the website. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye!